Oh my goodness sakes alive, what an effort. All right, now we're ready. Hopefully this doesn't sound terrible. Find out. All right, let me turn off my monitor there. I'd like to believe that it's still recording, that I haven't broken something horribly. Hi, my name's Keith. I'm learning how to use OBS. How are you? Okay. Welcome to Game Dev Coaching Office Hours. I'm Keith and I'm answering people questions. Let's jump in. What have we got today? What's on the top of the stack? All right. How long should I coach someone before deciding they just aren't working out? Oh boy. Okay. So you may recall me saying this in times past. The appropriate response should always begin with, it depends. Anytime you're giving an answer to a people question, it should start with, it depends. Because there's a lot of context that's absent here. I worked with a lead. Gosh, this would have been a year or two ago now. And he was telling me, I just started working with this company. And so he was kind of catching me up on the past several months of his work on the team. And he told me that there was a person that he had been coaching. They brought them in at a senior level and they just weren't doing senior level work. And so the lead had been spending some extra time with this person, really doing a lot more hand-holding than they should. And he said, yeah, I just feel like maybe I've been trying too long. Like maybe we should just do something a little bit more decisive here. And I said, well, how long have you been coaching this person? About 6 months. Okay, so for starters, you shouldn't be coaching someone for 6 months. I'm not saying this person is a lost cause at that point, but I am saying whatever we're trying has not been effective and something else needs to be done much, much sooner than 6 months. So how long should I coach someone? Well, less than 6 months, I'll tell you that. And it absolutely depends on the nature of what you're seeing. So what this requires is for us to talk about the concept of performance. How do you measure performance? So there are two axes on which we measure performance, and one is output. That is, fingers on keyboard, what was this person hired to do? And ideally, this started way back before we put together the job posting that this candidate applied for. We should have said, hey, here's a business need. This is what the company has to have to operate. We need an animator. We've never had an animator. We need an animator. Whatever. But there's a business need that we identify. That is the heart of the job posting. That's the heart of the interview process, the evaluation process. So that's the output. The output is you are here to meet a business need that we identified. Okay. The other axis of someone's performance is behavior. How do you act while you're doing the thing you were hired to do? Okay, so we've got two axes, output and behavior. Either one, if somebody is not meeting expectations, either one is a performance problem. So when we're talking about coaching someone, that means that we have identified one or both axes of their performance that is not meeting the business need that we set out. They are not adding the value that we're paying them to add, so we need to do something. Now, if it is a case of this person is a junior modeler, they just create 3D hard surface models and we expect them to churn out one a week, let's say. And the first one has to get redone a couple times because they just weren't grasping the art direction. The second one gets turned out okay. The third one, it gets delivered a day late. Fourth one turns out okay, right? So now we're like into month 2 of this person's performance, and it's not like every single thing they do is subpar, but like every other model, there's something wrong with the delivery. It's too late, the quality isn't quite there, whatever. In this case, are they mostly there? Yeah. I mean, eventually they're delivering what we need, but sometimes it requires some extra effort to get them to turn around and, nope, that's not quite the art direction you were given. Go back and change this. So there, it's not as dire of a performance problem. So the argument can be made that this is a case where it may take us a little bit longer to get them up to where we want them to be, and that's not the end of the world, because they are actually doing the work, and half of the time it meets expectations, the other half of the time it's just off a little bit. Okay, so in this case, maybe they need to be coached. If you haven't seen this turn around, if they haven't figured out how to take art direction and deliver in a timely enough manner within the next month, I'm concerned that they may not ever get there. And you may need to take more, like maybe you've just been kind of doing some informal stuff. Hey, you know what you do when he says orange, it needs to be orange, whatever. You've been doing some informal coaching up to this point. If things have not turned around in a month, I would say we need a little bit more formal process. That's not saying put this person on a performance improvement plan, because I don't like performance improvement plans, but we are getting into that territory where someone would typically call for a PIP, okay? If things haven't turned around after a month. If this is 2 months later and we still are not getting the quality performance we need from this person, if they are not at least on target after 2 months and you have been coaching them during this time, then I'm concerned. Why would we be keeping somebody around if after 2 months of being coached, they haven't figured out how to get the job done? Maybe we made a bad hire. So those are kind of some guidelines. Now, having said that, that's talking about the output aspect of someone's performance. The other axis, behavior. How do they act while they're doing the job? Maybe this person is turning out great models. Maybe they're higher quality than we expected, and they're even doing them faster than we expected. But they're a jerk. Right? So in this case, they have a performance issue. They are below target. They're not meeting our expectations in terms of behavior. What I will say is this. So there's essentially, if you imagine somebody is underperforming in one or both axes, and despite coaching and whatever, it just kind of continues and we don't see a fix, then at some point that's going to result in termination, because we can't pay you to not do the job we hired you to do. Okay, so imagine there's this timeline, right? And it starts with, I noticed something about this person's performance, and then it goes through some coaching and some more formal coaching, and then separation. Okay, there are things that can reset that timeline. Like if we do a little bit of coaching and they seem to get it, and they no longer have any problems, they don't have output problems, they don't have behavior problems, great. Then like it got this far, and then we brought it back in with some coaching, and now we're like a month later, and we don't even remember there was ever a problem with this person. Great. Then there are some things that can absolutely rocket this person to the you are unemployed end of the timeline. Typically, those are going to be behavior issues. That is not just you turned in your model late. Those are more things like, so here's an example from a client of mine I worked with years ago. They sent a bunch of folks from an American company. Okay, so they sent them to Gamescom, biggest game convention in Europe, 250,000 attendees or whatever. And they've got a company booth set up on the show floor, and so you've got thousands and thousands of people streaming by constantly, right? One of the members of the delegation from this company was, I think, a community manager. Apparently had a little bit of a history of being loudly opinionated. And they chose this moment on the show floor at Gamescom to get into an argument with a vice president of the company and eventually start yelling at the VP. So in front of 250,000 people, this community manager is yelling at the VP. You could argue that's maybe an output issue. I would argue that's pretty much just a behavior issue. And the thing is, that timeline we talked about, they just went from 0 to over 100 in one afternoon. That person was pretty much unemployed the second they landed back in the States. Because you can't just yell at a vice president. You don't get to do that. So when you think of, well, how quickly does somebody get to the bad end of that performance timeline? You can get there pretty quickly, sometimes in less than a day, and usually that's going to be a behavior problem. Now, it could be an output problem too, like, oops, I accidentally deleted our entire repository for the entire game. All the source code, all the assets that we've ever made, gone. 2 years worth of work gone. Irretrievable. Like, okay, that's kind of an output issue, and you're definitely fired for that. Like, that's hundreds of thousands, millions of dollars gone. You probably just caused the studio to get shuttered. Yeah. I mean, everyone's going to be unemployed because we don't have a product and we don't have a way to make money now. But you probably committed an output-related offense there that got you pretty much immediately terminated. So these sorts of things happen. And there are things that are, like, those things I just listed are bad but not illegal. There are illegal things you can do that should not be coached. There's not, like, if there is some sort of harassment or, heaven forbid, if there is an assault of any kind on another team member, that's not even a coaching issue. That's we are escorting you out of the building, or we are shutting off your credentials and your remote access immediately. You're terminated. There's no discussion. There's no coaching. You're done. That's illegal. You don't get to do that. So there are some things that are absolutely uncoachable. You do not even deserve an opportunity at coaching. That's illegal. We can't let you do that. But in general, if it's a standard kind of output-related issue, it's not fast enough, it's not good enough, then we try coaching, and depending on how big of a problem there is, how big of a performance gap there is, maybe this is something that we can that we can fix or make a determination that it deserves separation from the company within a month or two. But again, kind of depends on the nature of the performance difficulties or the violation, right, of our code of conduct or what have you in case of behavior. So how long should I coach someone before deciding they just aren't working out? It depends, but I would say a month or two is probably a good guideline. Certainly beyond 2 months, I would really wonder why this person still works here. Now, it could be that we're just giving them incredibly bad support. Like, they don't exactly get our pipeline or our workflow or whatever, and we are really bad at mentoring and coaching people. So that could partially be on us. But regardless, we hired them to do a thing and they aren't doing a thing. After 2 months, you better give me a really good explanation for why that person is still here and why we aren't separating and finding somebody else to bring in at that role who will meet the business need that we hire them to meet. All right, next question, also performance related. Performance reviews, do they always suck? Excellent question. I will, for a foundation, I'll go back to when I was a full-time employee, an Activision employee. And when I was working at Raven, they probably still do this, I'm guessing. We'd inherited Activision's performance review process. And that was this once a year, monolithic, documented process. And this was designed at a very corporate level, did not really apply to frontline game developers all that well. And so it was really just a horror show. It was us trying to come up with answers to questions that didn't even apply to people at the studio. Like, scale from 1 to 5. Tell me about Keith's business savvy. Like, dude, I don't know. I'm a gameplay programmer. A business savvy? I don't know. Like, we have to ship the game so it makes money. What do I get for that? A 3 out of 5? I don't know. So that process that's sort of where I start when I talk about performance reviews. I start there. It happened once a year, which is a terrible idea. It was an enormous amount of paperwork that wasn't applicable and added no value to either the manager or the team member. And the results of the performance review were promptly forgotten. Went in a drawer, never applied to this person for the rest of the year. So like that ticks every possible box. That's like the worst possible bad example that I can give someone. Okay, so we'll start there and we'll basically do the opposite. Especially in game development, what I have told clients for years, if you are only doing performance reviews once a year, standard annual review, don't do them at all. It is a net negative for all parties involved if you are doing a single performance review once a year. Maybe that works in other industries, kind of doubt it, but in games, how much changes in a year? Especially if you are at a somewhat larger studio where there may be concurrent projects. So at Raven, we typically had 2, maybe 3 projects going on. This is pre-Call of Duty days, right? There were 2, maybe 3 projects going on at the same time. And what would happen is people would get moved from project to project a couple times during the year. One thing is coming up with a demo, one thing is hitting a big milestone, one thing is shipping, right? And so you get moved around to the hot project frequently. So you may have a different lead 2 or 3 times a year. You have a different team, you have different responsibilities, all these kinds of things happen. You're trying to tell me that when you talk about professional development goals in January, that those are going to be in any way applicable to me 11 months later, after I have shifted projects twice and gone through 3 leads. Like, it's just, don't do it. So don't do annual reviews. I'm not married to the idea of twice or 4 times a year, but you should do some sort of a performance review more than once, okay? And the monolithic amount of paperwork involved, no, heck with that. This needs to be super lightweight. This needs to be a 1-pager that I'm looking at. It is not page after page of strongly disagree to strongly agree questions. So do it more than once a year. Make it extremely lightweight. You are foisting this on developers who just want to be performing their craft. That's what they want. That's where they would rather be. You are making them jump through administrative hoops to do any sort of performance review at all. So it needs to be lightweight so that they don't hate it, so they give better responses, and so that they get back to doing the thing you're paying them to do as soon as possible. The next thing that I recommend is let's think about this from the employee's perspective. What would make this process valuable to them? Whoever sits down and says, you know what, we should do performance reviews. Let's ask our team members, what about a performance review would make this valuable to you? And then let's do that. Like, no company ever does that. It is baffling to me. So think about it from the employee's perspective. What would make this process valuable? Let's do that. And then also, and here is a question that I ask and ask and ask, and I have yet to have anyone at any company ever give me a straight answer immediately. Why do we do performance reviews? Why? Why do they exist? Why do we even have them? In general, I think the thinking starts with, well, you have to do performance reviews. Okay, why? And then it falls apart, right? Well, because every company does them. Why? If we're lucky, it gets a little bit further, and people will say something like, well, This is a chance for us to assess that the team member is performing adequately. We have some sort of measures of success that indicate the expectations for their output, for their behavior. And this is a chance for us to make sure that they are performing adequately on both of those axes, right? So you're telling me we do annual reviews so that once a year we can tell if somebody is doing a decent enough job? Really? If that's actually the reason we do performance reviews, why on earth are we only doing them in January? Or even if we do them twice a year? Really? Every 6 months? So you tell me in January, Keith, you're doing a good job. And then we don't know how good a job I'm doing until July? Like, I could be screwing things up left, right, and center for 5 months. You're telling me you wouldn't know? That's pretty terrible. So my contention is this. I am a fan of what management author Ken Blanchard, a bunch of books that he's put out, The 1 Minute Manager, these kinds of things. He talks about the 3 tiers of feedback. So when we think of feedback, we typically think of the performance review. Done. That's it. That's what feedback means. Okay, well, that's one of the tiers. That's the most formal of the 3 tiers. And that is something that happens in a very formal way and very much so less frequently. The most informal way is daily coaching. Something happens, good or bad, you, the manager, respond within 24 hours, preferably face-to-face, definitely one-on-one. Hey, that presentation went really well today. I thought you really threaded the needle with the wording on that email. That screenshot you sent to marketing was perfect. Whatever, like some simple piece of feedback, daily coaching, all right? So we have performance reviews, we have daily coaching, and then the middle tier is the one that I contend should absolutely do the heavy lifting in terms of feedback. This should be 3/4 of the feedback anybody ever gets, and that is the one-on-one. And I have entire diatribes prepared to launch into effective one-on-one discussion. But the deal is, these should be regular. We schedule them, they're on a calendar. Frequent, that means different things to different people, but once a month is not often enough. And they are designed not as a status report, although if we start off only feeling comfortable talking about status things in our one-on-ones, okay, that's where we start, but that's not where we want to stay. But this is a place where the manager builds rapport. You create a connection, and you demonstrate to the team member that they're important, and that you are keeping tabs on what they're doing, and that you are there to provide support for whatever they need. And you do this every week, every 2 weeks, whatever. If that's happening, anything that would eventually be important enough to be in a performance review gets talked about more than once before the performance review. Whatever you think you're doing with performance reviews should be happening in one-on-ones. And I had a client ask me this years ago after I kind of went through all of this education process. I did a presentation to the leadership team on performance, on feedback. And after all this, talking about the value of one-on-ones, the CEO said, well, if all of that is true about one-on-ones, Keith, then why do we even do performance reviews? And I'm like, that's exactly the question you need to be asking. If we're doing all the things that we should be doing in one-on-ones, why do we even need performance reviews? So that's the backdrop, right, for performance reviews. Do they always suck? I would say 4 out of 5 times they suck. So that's, does some quick math, 80% of the time they suck. Another easily 15% of the time, they are only an annoyance. So they don't suck, but they're annoying. And then maybe 5% of the time, they're actually valuable to people involved. So those are probably the numbers from clients that I've worked with, from companies at which I've worked. And I have outlined what some of the causes are behind the suckiness, some of the things that we should be doing to fix the process, some of the questions we should be asking ourselves. What would make this valuable to the employees? Why do we even do performance reviews? These kinds of things. And the number one solution to make performance reviews suck less is have one-on-ones. Because then nothing would ever come up as a surprise in a performance review, and people are getting more meaningful and frequent feedback on their performance. So then whatever you wind up doing in a performance review can be more lightweight, because it's really just a recap of the past 3 months, past 6 months of one-on-ones. Well, you remember we talked about this thing with your performance back in August, but then come October, it was a thing of the past, wasn't really a problem, and so I'm just mentioning it here for closure. Done, moving on. Like, that's what should be happening in performance reviews. Okay, so there you go. Do they always suck? Strictly speaking, no, but the mathematical average is definitely high levels of suckiness, unfortunately. But there are some ways that they can be better. All right, let's see here. Question 3. How do I grow my career if I don't want to be a people manager? It depends. Okay. Again, going back to my days at Raven when I was a programmer, the only way you got promoted was to become lead programmer. Like, that was it. That's your path. Eventually, they got wise and said, you know what? Forcing people to go down a management track is not a great idea, because that's not always something that people want. So what we should do, instead of having a career ladder, like junior, mid, senior, whatever, it should have a fork at some point. And my suggestion is this, that we get lost in titles a lot, but in general, there are maybe about 6 levels that you can think of. You can add in between there and come up with like 37 levels. But in general, a career ladder has about 6 levels. And they're going to start at junior or associate, whatever, right? So you've got like a junior associate kind of a thing. You've got maybe senior manager, director, VP, like CEO, something like that. Okay. So this is the neighborhood that we're dealing with here when we talk about levels in someone's career. My contention is a great place to start is to say, listen, we can absolutely have junior and then senior, and then at senior is where we can offer a branch. If you want to remain what we call an individual contributor, an IC, if you want to remain an IC on the programming track, then you can absolutely go from senior to principal or studio or double dragon bonus engineer, or whatever titles you make up. But point being, you can go along that path as an individual contributor. Once you get to senior, though, if you're like, you know what, I might actually want to be a lead. I might enjoy managing people. I would like to give that a shot. Okay, well, senior is the point at which we can split off and have a second branch. This is the management track. This is where you go to being a manager. You're now going to be a lead of some sort, and then maybe director or whatever. So that is the general template for how career paths should look. Give someone an option somewhere around the senior level of saying, yeah, I just want to be really good at the thing that I do. I do not want to lead others. Great. Here's your path. Head towards that. Head towards principal, studio, whatever. If you decide people leadership is for you, wonderful. Here's the path that you're headed towards. So those should be options that are available to somebody in any given company. Now, if you're at a small company, right, then things look a little different because you have fewer options. If you're at a larger company, 100 people plus, even 50 people, there should be options for somebody to remain at the company and grow and be adding greater value without being forced to lead other humans. So how do I grow my career if I don't want to be a people manager? Well, chances are you are at a company that does not have overly well-defined career paths for people. That may not really be documented anywhere. We kind of sort of made up some titles at one point, but we couldn't really tell you what exactly it means to be senior animator versus a principal animator versus a double secret executive animator. We don't really know, to be honest. So that's probably where you find yourself, is we have some titles. Maybe they make sense, maybe they don't. Maybe they're just kind of handed out haphazardly. You get senior animator and you get senior animator. But you probably don't have well-documented, well-thought-out career ladders. Okay. So if that's the case, then there is somebody, your boss, whoever that is. You have a lead. Maybe it's the CEO. Maybe it's a larger company. You have somebody in an HR or people operations function that you can talk to and say, all right, what do my options look like for growth here? If I don't want to be a manager, if I want to remain an individual contributor, what does my career path look like here? So you could maybe even begin this discussion if we don't have documented career paths. If you ask these questions and they can't immediately provide a document for you, oh, here's the spreadsheet, look, it shows how you get from this level to this level. If they don't have that, then what you can do is begin that discussion and say, I feel like this is something that we should have. How can I help us get to this point where we have a documented career ladder for all of our disciplines, right? For art, for audio, for QA. So how do you grow your career? You should have a branching career path available to you that is well documented. You probably don't. So then you start this discussion by talking to your lead or HR or the studio head and saying, this is a thing that I feel like we should have because I, for one, need it right now. I need to know what my career looks like here because I want to do this. I don't want to do this. And I don't even know if I have either or both of those options here. So you ask politely and professionally to talk about what's my career path. So the way that you can achieve this, again, ideally, there are clear measures of success at each of the levels on the career path. So if you are a senior engineer, these are the 4 things that we expect you to be able to do. A principal engineer, we expect you to do these 5 things. So with that, you can you probably sit down with your lead, whoever does your reviews. You sit down with them and go, okay, well, I'm at level X and I want to be at level X plus 1. What's the gap between the things that I can do, the competence I have demonstrated, and the skills I'm supposed to have mastered at the next level? Okay, so we figure out what those are. We figure out what are the things that I can do here. Who can I learn from? What new challenges can I take on? Who can I shadow? What YouTube videos can I watch so that I can demonstrate competence at this level? Right, so like that's the process you should be able to go through. If you don't have all of the stuff that I've talked about, the documented paths and such for your company, then at the very least, you need to be able to sit down with whoever does your reviews, whoever signs your paycheck, and say, I'm at level X. I want to get to level X plus 1 here. How can I do that? And there are examples out there that you can look at. One example that I always point people towards is Basecamp. So the makers of the project management tool, I guess, called Basecamp. Their employee handbook that contains all of this stuff, they've actually made it publicly available. And there are probably others out there if you nose around. But this is one that I can always point people towards because it very clearly says, here's junior, here's senior, here are the things we expect you to do at each level. And so you can look at that as an example. And if your company has none of these, sit down with your studio head, your lead, whoever, and say, well, here's an example. How closely do you think this matches what we do? And then you can formulate your own path at least looking at something else for comparison. So that is the route that I would suggest. You ask about career paths. You ask about where that branches from individual contributor and leadership path. And if we don't have those things documented, then you make the suggestion that I would really like to sit down with somebody and at least come up with what these options look like for me. I mean, ideally, everybody in the company should know what their options look like, but I need to know because this is my career and nobody else is going to craft it for me, which is a completely reasonable stance for you to take in terms of self-advocacy. So do that. And then you can go find examples elsewhere if you have none to draw from within the company and say, how closely does this model what we could be doing here? And from that, you come up with a plan that says, I can do these things and I need to be able to do these things. And here are the 4 or 5 goals that we're going to work on that get me to learn the things that I don't yet know, so that you can then say, oh, well, yeah, here you go. You are now principal engineer. Congratulations. You continue on your path and you don't have to be a people manager. Oh, all right. Well, after multiple failings on my part to understand how microphones work, we got things rolling today. We answered a few questions. Thank you for your time. I hope you found this helpful. And we do Game Dev Coaching office hours every Wednesday, 7 p.m. U.S. Central Time. And I'll also encourage you, hey, I've got a, first of all, you want to reach out on LinkedIn, feel free. But also, I've got a series of videos on game dev leadership skills that you can check out from the Game Dev Coaching website. So check those out, and hopefully we'll catch you next week.